The neck of the green bottle was cold in my hand, but the fire it carried down my throat was hotter than the misery burning in my chest. I had been sitting on the same wooden stool in the corner of that dim bar for almost 2 hours, downing star lager after star lager as though alcohol had the power to wash away poison. Maybe that's what I was trying to do. Flush out the venom Maria had poured into my life. But the truth was simple and cruel. No matter how much I drank, the poison remained, flowing freely in my blood. My eyes drifted to the large clock mounted high on the wall, its white face glowing faintly under the yellow bulb. I stared at it until the numbers blurred, and when they sharpened again, I realized it was already 10:45 p.m. Almost 11, and still I lingered here like a coward afraid of the inevitable. Because that was what home had become for me, inevitable pain. Home. The word should mean peace, safety, a soft place to rest. But for me, home was a battlefield, a furnace, a hell dressed in human skin. I often wondered if I had offended God somewhere along the line. Maybe I had sinned in ways beyond forgiveness, and my punishment was Maria. Perhaps that was the devil's cleverest trick, not sending demons with horns and fire, but wrapping them in the delicate frame of a beautiful woman and calling her wife. I sighed and dragged another gulp from the bottle, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. The beer had made my mind shallow, but not shallow enough to drown my thoughts. The pain still rose to the surface, sharp and jagged like broken glass. After 10 years of marriage, people expected me to have grown used to it. But pain doesn't dull with repetition. Every insult still stung like the first slap. Every humiliation scorched as fiercely as the first flame. I tilted my head back against the wall, staring at the cracked ceiling of the bar. What was I to do? If I left the stool, I was walking back into the fire. But if I stayed, the bar owners would soon send me packing. Sleeping here was not an option. I had tried it before. At best, I ended up at the security post, lying on a wooden bench with mosquitoes singing in my ears. Once, robbers raided the street in the middle of the night, and the sound of gunshots filled the air. I prayed like a child that night, begging God not to let me die there, drunk and pitiful. Somehow, morning came, and I walked back home alive. But alive to what? To Maria, to the woman who had turned my marriage into a prison sentence. I drained the bottle, slapped a few crumpled notes on the counter, and staggered toward the exit. My legs were heavy, my head buzzing, but not enough to make me forget where I was going. Not enough to save me from remembering her voice, sharp as a whip, waiting for me the moment I opened the door. Before you brand me a drunk, maybe I should tell you a little about myself. My name is Cletus, 49 years old, retired sergeant of the Nigeria police force. 6 years retired, 10 years married, and father of 5 children I would lay down my life for. Once upon a time, I thought my life was set on the right course. A good job, a decent future, a wife chosen, so I believed by God himself. Now I was just a man stumbling home, too broken to fight, too ashamed to cry, too tired to keep pretending. Maria, my wife, works in an oil company. She is the breadwinner, the provider, the one who pays the rent, the school fees, the hospital bills, the feeding. She covers it all and even presses money into my hands sometimes so I won't look entirely useless. On the outside, people might say I am blessed. A woman who provides everything. What more could a man ask for? But they don't see the bruises that don't show on the skin. They don't hear the venom in her voice, the curses she hurls like stones, the way she reduces me to nothing in front of my children. Even in my drunken stupor, the thought of walking into her fury made my stomach twist. Maria, the devil in flesh. No wonder the serpent was able to deceive Eve. Women must have inherited a portion of that cunning. And Maria, she had perfected it. She fooled me, she fooled our pastor. She fooled the entire church into believing she was the image of holiness, the model wife every man should pray for. But once the doors of our home closed, the mask fell away, and what remained was fire, fury, and torment. The cool night air slapped my face as I stepped out of the bar. I staggered through the quiet streets, shadows stretching long under the flickering streetlights. My mind wandered, as it often did, to the question that haunted me most. Where did I go wrong? Was it in trusting too much? In believing that God had truly chosen her for me? Or was it in being too weak, too eager to surrender my will to others? Somewhere along the line, I had lost myself, and in losing myself, I had gained a wife who treated me like a dog she fed out of pity. By the time I reached our gate, my legs were trembling, not just from alcohol but from dread. I knew what awaited me on the other side. I could already hear her voice in my head, sharp and bitter, ready to tear me down again. Still, I pushed the gate open and stepped inside, because where else could I go? A man may hate his prison, but he still sleeps inside it when night falls. The gate creaked behind me as I stepped into the compound, and instantly the familiar weight of dread settled over my chest. Even in my drunken haze, I could already hear her voice rising in my head, sharp and merciless. And true to my fears, Maria's fury met me the moment I pushed open the front door. Where have you been, you caricature of a husband? Where on earth have you been, you born loser? She spat, her eyes blazing. I staggered slightly, my hand brushing the wall for balance. So you finally decided to grace me with your stinking, drunken corpse this night? Weren't you supposed to put the kids to bed before going anywhere? Her words came at me like stones. Cletus, I feed you, shelter you, clothe you, and even fill your pocket with money, but just to glue your lousy butt to a seat and take care of the kids. You find that difficult? I swear one day I will throw you out of this house, and when you starve to death, maybe the town council will pick your decomposed body from the gutter. She hissed, turned on her heels, and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me standing there with her curses still echoing in my ears. My eyes went to the children's room down the corridor. I could hear them shuffling restlessly, whispering, pretending to be asleep. They always heard, they always knew, and every time, the shame cut deeper into me. I wanted to shout, to stand my ground, to remind Maria that I was still their father, still a man deserving of respect. But my voice died in my throat. All that came out was silence, the silence of a man who had surrendered long ago. I stumbled into the kids' room and found them huddled together. Their wide eyes studied me as though trying to measure the storm outside. "Go to sleep," I whispered, forcing a smile. My words were heavy with weariness. I tucked the blanket around them, kissed the youngest, and turned off the light. That night, I lay on the couch in the sitting room, staring at the ceiling until my eyes burned. Somewhere in the distance, Maria's voice carried from the bedroom, talking on the phone, laughing. The same woman who spat venom at me hours ago had laughter reserved for others. My laughter had long been banished. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and filled with dark dreams. And as usual, morning arrived with Maria's shriek piercing the walls. "Junior, go and wake that useless bastard who calls himself your father," she barked. I heard my son's small footsteps rush toward the sitting room. Before he could open his mouth to shout, "Daddy," I raised a hand to signal that I was already awake. He nodded quickly and ran back to report to his mother. What a ritual. What a sad, ordinary ritual. I often wondered what it would feel like to wake up differently. Maybe to the soft touch of a wife's hand on my chest, a playful peck, or even a gentle nudge in the ribs. Such simple gestures of love. I had wished for them so often that if wishes were enough to kill a man, I would have been long dead by now. Dragging myself up, I washed my face, brushed my teeth, and began the day's first duty, preparing the children for school. One by one, I dressed them, fed them, combed their hair, and checked their bags. These were my tasks now, my daily routine. By the time we were done, the sun was already stretching across the sky. "Cletus," Maria's voice called from the bedroom. I sighed and told the kids to wait for me by the stairs. Then I walked to the room. She was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her blouse, the faint smell of expensive perfume trailing in the air. She looked stunning, radiant even, but her beauty had become a weapon that only mocked me. "Yes, Maria, you called me?" She didn't bother to look at me. Instead, she picked up her handbag and began issuing orders in her usual clipped tone. I made a list of things to be bought at the market. Later today, Take the list and enough money from my drawer. Go with the house girl, buy everything, and make sure the afternoon and evening meals are ready before I return. And Cletus, the ironing you didn't finish yesterday, I expect it done before evening. Laziness has completely overtaken you, and I'm tired of reminding you of your duties. And please, help the children with their homework tonight and put them to bed by 9:30 sharp. Even if I'm not back, you have no excuse. In fact, you might as well forget about that useless drinking you call a hobby today. She slung her handbag over her shoulder and marched past me. The sharp sound of her heels echoed against the tiles as she descended the stairs, carrying the children's bags with her. A few seconds later, the sound of her car engine filled the compound, then faded into the distance. I stood there for a moment, staring at the space she had left behind, my head bent in a mixture of pain and resignation. My heart longed for tears, but I had none left to shed. Tears had become strangers to me. Maybe God didn't put enough of them in a man's body because he thought we wouldn't need them. But if only he knew. If only he knew that I cried silently almost as often as my youngest daughter. I gathered the kids and walked them to school. Their chatter filled the air, innocent and unaware of the storm inside me. And as I walked back alone, each step heavy, my mind drifted to the past, to the moment this path began, to the pastor who claimed to see visions of my future. That was the day my fate was sealed. It was a Sunday afternoon when the pastor called me aside after service. His tone was calm, his eyes piercing, the way men of God often spoke when they wanted to make you feel that heaven itself had paused just for you. "My son," he began, resting a firm hand on my shoulder. "I saw something about you during prayer. I was younger then, filled with zeal, a believer who thought men of God held the keys to life itself." I leaned closer, eager. "The Lord showed me your destiny," he said. "Great things are waiting for you. But there is a woman, specially chosen for you, who will unlock your blessings. Without her, you will struggle all your life. With her, the heavens will open, and you will prosper." His words fell on me like rain on dry soil. A chosen woman? One who carried the key to my future. At that time, I was just like every other young bachelor, dreaming of success, longing for love, and desperate to belong somewhere. So of course, I believed him, and then he mentioned her name, Maria. At first, the name didn't strike me deeply. I had seen her in the choir before, tall, elegant, her voice lifting high above the others like a bell. People often admired her beauty and confidence. I admired her too, but from a distance. I never thought she could be my wife. Until that day, the pastor smiled, as if reading my thoughts. "Go and speak to her. Waste no time. God has already prepared her heart." I nodded like a soldier receiving orders from his general. And from that moment, Maria was no longer just a woman in the choir. She became the will of God for me. I approached her carefully, with the nervousness of a man touching sacred ground. To my surprise, she received me warmly. Her laughter was light, her eyes playful. She had a way of making you feel as though you were the only man alive. We began talking more after rehearsals, walking together after service, sharing little stories of our lives. She was witty, bold, unafraid to speak her mind. I admired that. I told myself she was strong, a woman who would build with me, fight beside me, and push me to greatness. Our courtship bloomed quickly. Too quickly, perhaps. Everyone in church noticed. The pastor often winked at me, a knowing smile playing on his lips, as though to say, "Didn't I tell you?" My friends envied me, congratulated me, and deep down I felt chosen, special. When I took her to meet my family, my mother raised her eyebrows slightly, as if she had caught a strange scent in the air. But she said nothing. She only whispered later, "Cletus, are you sure this is the woman for you?" "Yes, Mama," I said firmly. The pastor confirmed it. This is God's will. And that ended the matter. Who could argue against the will of God? Our wedding came like a whirlwind, songs, prayers, celebration. Maria was radiant, walking down the aisle like a queen in white. The pastor gave a sermon that sounded more like a prophecy. This union is divinely orchestrated. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. I believed every word. I stood at the altar, looking into Maria's eyes, thinking, this is it. My life begins today. The early days of our marriage carried a sweetness that now feels like a cruel joke. Maria was affectionate then, cooking with me, laughing easily, calling me sweet names that rolled off her tongue like honey. I remember thinking, if heaven feels like this, then I have tasted it already. But like sugar that dissolves too quickly in hot tea, that sweetness didn't last. Little by little, the laughter faded. The warmth cooled. The playful words were replaced by sharp comments, and then by open insults. At first, I thought it was just stress, the adjustment of two people learning to live together. But with time, it became clear. This was no phase. This was her true face. I often replayed the pastor's words in my head. She is the one chosen for you. She will unlock your blessings. And yet, every day with Maria felt like a padlock tightening around my soul. Looking back now, I see how naive I was, how blind. I mistook confidence for love, sharpness for strength, manipulation for divine will. I let someone else's vision replace my own. And by the time I realized, it was too late. The chain was already fastened around my neck. But in those early years, even as the cracks widened, I kept clinging to hope. Hope that the woman I courted, the one who laughed and called me sweet names, would return. Hope that the pastor's words hadn't been a lie. Hope that maybe, just maybe, God hadn't abandoned me to a marriage that felt more like a prison than a home. The years rolled on, and what I once called a marriage slowly revealed itself as a prison sentence. Maria, the woman I had sworn before God and men to love and cherish, became my warden. She ruled the house with a tongue sharper than a blade and a spirit that brooked no opposition. At first, I resisted in little ways. I tried to assert myself, to remind her I was the man of the house. But each attempt was crushed with words that cut deeper than fists ever could. "You're useless," she spat one night after a quarrel. "Without me, you'd be nothing. Don't deceive yourself." I should have walked away that night, but I didn't. Instead, I swallowed my pride, telling myself marriage was about endurance, about patience. I told myself God hated divorce, that I was carrying a cross meant to purify me. How foolish. With time, her dominance extended beyond the walls of our home. Friends stopped visiting because Maria always found a way to belittle me in front of them. My family drifted away because every time they came, she picked fights, insulted them, or looked down on them. My mother, the same woman who had once raised her eyebrows at Maria, eventually sighed and said, "My son, you chose this path. Now walk in it." I became a stranger in my own bloodline, a man cut off from his roots, wandering in loneliness while pretending to have a family. The children were not spared either. They grew up watching their father shrink in silence, watching their mother bark orders and win every battle. Sometimes they pitied me. Sometimes they mirrored her disrespect. How could they not? Children learn what they see, and what they saw was a father who was more ghost than man. Religion, the very thing that had tied me to Maria, became my greatest wound. I stopped going to church after a while. How could I kneel before a God who, through his so-called servant, had yoked me to suffering? The pastor still smiled at me whenever our paths crossed, his lips forming empty words of blessing. But inside, I burned with anger. I wanted to ask him, where is the destiny you promised me? Where are the blessings she was meant to unlock? But I kept quiet, not because I forgave him, but because I no longer cared. Faith had slipped through my fingers like water. My prayers dried up. My songs died. Even my hope of heaven faded, because I felt I had already tasted hell right here on earth. I thought about leaving, God knows I did. Many nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining a different life. A life where I walked into a small apartment, peace greeting me at the door instead of insults. A life where my children respected me, not because I was perfect, but because I stood tall as their father. A life where love wasn't a battlefield, but a shelter. But leaving would have meant war. Maria was the kind of woman who would rather burn the house down than see me walk away with dignity. And so I stayed, shackled, chained. Now, I sit in bars, drowning in bottles, trying to blur the edges of my pain. Each gulp burns down my throat, but it numbs the ache inside. I laugh loudly with strangers, because silence reminds me of the mockery my life has become. And when the night ends, I stagger home, not because I want to, but because even hell has a bed. Maria still waits at the door, tongue sharpened, ready to remind me how worthless I am. I let her talk. I let her win. My rebellion ended years ago, but in the quiet of my heart, I know the truth. I am not the man I was meant to be. I am the man who surrendered his destiny to the wrong woman. And so, if you are reading this, if you are a young man, standing at the edge of love, thinking marriage is just about beauty or prophecy or pressure from men of God, listen to me. Listen carefully. Marriage is no joke. It is no small matter. It is a chain that can either anchor you to peace or drag you into the depths of misery. Do not let anyone, pastor, prophet, or parent choose for you. Do not mistake charm for character or confidence for compassion. A bad marriage will not only break your heart, it will break your spirit, your family, even your faith. It will turn you into a shadow of yourself, a man who looks alive on the outside but is dead inside. So choose wisely. Love with your eyes open, not closed by prophecy or blinded by infatuation. Because once the chain is fastened, it is not easily broken. I, Cletus, have walked this path. I have worn these chains, and my life as it stands is nothing more than a cautionary tale. Do not be me.